Eli Bishop sat at his desk in the small, cluttered classroom. The hum of the outdated fluorescent lights above, blending with the distant sounds of students moving through the hallways. The classroom was nothing special. The walls were a dull beige, the desks mismatched, and the windows offered little more than a view of the city's concrete skyline. Despite its dreary appearance, Eli loved this classroom. It was his space, and it was where he had spent the last 10 years of his life, teaching history to a group of kids who often seemed more interested in their phones than the past. Eli wasn't wealthy. In fact, he was barely getting by. His paychecks from the school district, controlled by one of the city's massive corporate corporations, barely covered rent and utilities. It didn't matter, though. He didn't need much. He had always been a man of simple tastes, finding joy in small things. The smell of fresh paper, the excited look on a student's face when they grasped a concept, or the satisfaction of seeing his students do well in life. But today, Eli was particularly bothered. He couldn't stop thinking about Jake. Jake was one of his students, a 17-year-old senior who always sat in the back row, trying to keep a low profile. Jake had a lot going against him. He came from a poor family, and his clothes were often ragged. The other students had a way of picking on him for it, and it broke Eli's heart to see the young man shrink under their harsh words. That morning, as Jake walked into class, Eli couldn't help but notice the large hole in the sole of Jake's shoes. The shoes were thin, barely holding together, and Eli could see the young man limping slightly as he walked. The cold, wet weather outside had turned the streets into a muddy mess, and Eli could only imagine how hard it must have been for Jake to make it to school in those conditions. Eli knew he didn't have much to offer. But something inside him clicked. He couldn't just sit by and do nothing. During lunch, Eli made his way to the small, local store around the corner, hoping he could find something affordable. After a few minutes of browsing, he found a pair of simple, sturdy shoes. They weren't anything fancy, but they would do the job. He didn't have the money to buy anything else, but he knew it was enough to help Jake get through the day without worrying about his feet. When the bell rang to signal the end of lunch, Eli walked back into his classroom, the shoes tucked under his arm. He found Jake sitting at his desk, looking down at the worn shoes he had been wearing for weeks. Eli walked over to him and placed the new shoes gently on the desk. "Jake," he said softly, "I noticed your shoes are pretty worn out. I thought you might need a new pair." Jake's eyes widened in surprise. He looked up at Eli, his face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Mr. Bishop, I can't accept these," Jake stammered, his voice shaky. Eli smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay. I just wanted to help. You don't have to pay me back or anything. Just take them." Jake looked down at the shoes, then back at Eli. "But why? You don't even know me that well." Eli shrugged. "I don't need to know you well to see that you deserve better. Sometimes, we just have to look out for each other." Jake hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Bishop. I don't know what to say." Eli patted him on the back. "Just take care of yourself, okay? And don't let anyone tell you that you don't deserve kindness." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Eli tried to focus on teaching, but his mind kept drifting back to Jake. He hoped that the shoes would make a difference for him. He didn't expect any grand gesture or thanks. He just wanted Jake to feel like he mattered, like someone cared. But by the end of the day, Eli's small act of kindness had already begun to unravel the threads of his life. The next morning, Eli woke up to a series of angry messages on his phone. He frowned as he read through them. Some were from parents, others from colleagues, but all were pointing in the same direction. Eli had crossed a line. It started with a simple email from the principal of the school, Mr. Holt. The message was brief, but its tone was cold and sharp. "Mr. Bishop, I've received several complaints about your actions yesterday. It has come to my attention that you provided personal gifts to a student, specifically purchasing shoes for Jake Williams. While I'm sure your intentions were good, this is a violation of school policy. Teachers are not permitted to give financial aid or gifts to students, as it creates an undue dependency. Effective immediately, I am placing you on administrative leave pending an investigation into your conduct. Sincerely, Mr. Holt. Eli stared at the message, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. He had been fired before, of course. Being a teacher in a city like this meant that job security was always shaky, but this was different. He had been fired for doing something good, for helping someone who needed it. His heart sank. The idea that something so simple and kind could lead to his dismissal was unfathomable. But that was the world he lived in now, a world where rules were more important than people, where bureaucracy took precedence over kindness. And yet, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply wrong with a system that punished him for showing empathy. As the day went on, Eli received more messages, angry parents, a few colleagues offering their support, and others condemning his actions. But what stung the most was the comment from the student body president, Amber. She sent him a message that read, "I can't believe you'd do something like that. Mr. Bishop, you're not supposed to get involved like that. You've just made everything worse." Eli couldn't understand it. He had tried to make things better, to show Jake that someone cared. But in the eyes of the administration and the parents, it was a breach of professionalism. There was no room for kindness in a world like this. That night, Eli sat alone in his small apartment, staring out the window at the city lights below. He felt defeated, unsure of what his next step should be. But just as he was about to give in to despair, there was a knock on his door. He opened it to find a package sitting on the doorstep. It was an odd-looking envelope, sealed with a wax stamp. It had no return address, just his name written neatly in an elegant script. Inside, there was a letter. "Dear Eli Bishop, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Nathaniel Bishop, and I am your great-uncle. I have been following your life from afar, and I have come to the conclusion that you are the one I have been waiting for. I have something important to give you, something that will change the course of your life. Please make your way to the address listed below. There, you will find the inheritance I've left you. It is time for you to take your place in a much larger world. Yours sincerely, Nathaniel Bishop." Eli stared at the letter, confusion and disbelief clouding his mind. He had never heard of this uncle before. He didn't even know he had a great uncle, but something in the letter felt urgent, like it was calling to him. And just like that, everything changed. Eli didn't know what to expect, but deep down, he felt that this unexpected inheritance might be the key to something much larger than he could ever imagine. The letter from Nathaniel Bishop was more than just an invitation. It was a mystery, one that Eli could not ignore. The strange and cryptic message stirred something inside him, a curiosity, a hope, and an overwhelming sense of urgency. He knew he had to follow the instructions. Even if it was some kind of prank, even if it didn't make sense, he had no other choice but to see where it led. The address on the letter was not far from where Eli lived, tucked away in the less crowded part of the city, near the industrial district. It wasn't the sort of place someone would normally associate with wealth or importance. The buildings here were old, worn down by years of neglect, but the address was specific, and Eli knew this wasn't a mistake. After work the next day, he decided to visit. The streets were darkening as the sun dipped behind the city's jagged skyline, and the cold winds from the north began to chill the air. Eli wrapped his coat tighter around himself and made his way down the street. The further he walked, the more isolated it became. The neighborhood felt empty, the hum of the city's usual energy replaced by an eerie silence. Finally, Eli found the building he was looking for. A tall, narrow structure that looked like it had been abandoned for years. The windows were boarded up, and there was a rusty metal door at the entrance. There was nothing particularly remarkable about it, yet something about the building seemed to draw him in, as if it were waiting for him to arrive. Eli stood there for a moment, hesitating. He wasn't sure what he was expecting to find. He had no idea who this Nathaniel Bishop was, or why he had been chosen to inherit something from him. But his curiosity pushed him forward, and with a deep breath, he walked up to the door. To his surprise, it opened as soon as he reached for the handle. There was no sound of locks turning, No need to push or pull, it simply creaked open as if it had been waiting for him. He stepped inside, and the door closed behind him with a soft thud. Inside, the building was completely different from what it looked like on the outside. The air was warm, and the lighting was soft, almost inviting. There were no signs of neglect, no dust or debris on the floor. The walls were lined with old, but well-maintained furniture, and paintings that looked like they belonged in a museum hung on the walls. Eli took a few steps forward, his footsteps echoing on the polished floors. The entire place felt out of place, like it was from another world. There was something surreal about it, and in the center of the room, he saw something even more bizarre. A large, ornate desk, behind which sat a figure he didn't recognize. The man was older, with gray hair and sharp features that seemed both kind and calculating at the same time. He was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, one that looked far too expensive for someone living in a city like this. He looked up as Eli approached, a faint smile on his lips. "Mr. Bishop, I presume?" the man said in a voice that was both welcoming and formal. Eli nodded, still unsure of what to make of the situation. "Yes, I'm Eli Bishop. I received a letter from you." "From Nathaniel Bishop?" The man's eyes sparkled with recognition. "Ah, yes. I am Nathaniel's associate. I've been expecting you." Eli blinked. "Associate?" The man stood up, his movements fluid and purposeful. "Please, take a seat. I understand this must be quite a lot for you to take in. But I assure you, everything is as it should be." Eli sat down slowly, still trying to process what was happening. The man behind the desk sat as well, folding his hands together in front of him. "Nathaniel Bishop, your great-uncle, was a man of great influence and vision," the man began. "He was a key figure in something much larger than you can imagine. A movement that spans not just across this world, but across the stars. And now, Eli, you have been chosen to continue his work." Eli leaned forward, his curiosity deepening. "A movement? Across the stars?" The man nodded. "Yes. Nathaniel was part of a secret organization, a group dedicated to ensuring that humanity would not be enslaved by the corporations that control everything. They understood that the only way to truly free humanity was to give people the power of knowledge, the power to challenge the system, and the ability to break free from the artificial divisions that kept people from realizing their true potential." Eli's mind raced. He had always known that something was wrong with the world, the divide between the rich and the poor, the way the corporations controlled everything, the way the government seemed to do nothing to stop it. But he never imagined that such an organization existed, much less that his uncle was a part of it. "What does this have to do with me?" Eli asked. The man's gaze softened. "Your uncle left behind something important for you. It's a device, a technology that can change everything. It can give you the power to access information, knowledge that has been hidden from the public for generations. It's a tool that will allow you to fight back, to disrupt the systems that control your life and the lives of billions of others." Eli's heart began to race. "What kind of device?" The man stood and walked over to a table behind him, where a small, sleek object sat covered by a cloth. He lifted the cloth to reveal a strange device, unlike anything Eli had ever seen. It was a small, metallic cube with intricate markings etched into its surface. The design was alien, yet somehow familiar. "This is the device your uncle used," the man explained. "It is called a quantum interface. It allows the user to access vast amounts of knowledge in an instant. With it, you can learn languages, science, history, and even engineering skills, all without ever picking up a book. You can hack into systems, gain access to classified information, and even communicate with people across the stars. It is the key to unlocking the future." Eli's mind was spinning. He had always dreamed of doing something more, of making a real difference in the world. But he never imagined something like this. A device that could give him the power to change everything. "Why me?" Eli asked. "Why did Nathaniel choose me?" The man smiled gently. "Because you have something that others don't heart. You see the world for what it is, and you're willing to do something about it. Nathaniel knew that, which is why he left this to you. But be warned, Eli. The people who control this world won't give up their power easily. They'll do everything they can to stop you. Eli looked at the device, then back at the man. His thoughts were a whirlwind of possibilities, doubts, and fear. He had never considered himself a hero, just a teacher trying to make a difference in the small ways he could. But this was something else. You don't have to do this, Eli, the man said. But if you choose to accept your uncle's legacy, the fight will be long and dangerous. You'll have to be prepared for what's coming. Eli sat back in his chair, his mind working furiously. He thought of Jake, the student he had tried to help, the one who had been bullied and neglected. He thought of the system that had crushed him, the same system that had fired him for trying to make a difference. I'll do it, Eli said, his voice steady. I'll take the device. I'll fight. The man nodded, pleased. Good. Then you have already begun your journey. I'll show you how to use it. With that, Eli's new life began. As the man demonstrated how to activate the device, Eli felt something deep inside him shift. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose. The world might be broken, but he had the power to change it. The next few weeks flew by in a blur for Eli. After receiving the device, he found himself grappling with a new reality, one in which his life, once so simple and predictable, had suddenly become tangled in a web of intrigue and potential danger. He had always been just a teacher, someone who loved to help his students. But now, with the quantum interface in his hands, he had the power to change everything. At first, the technology was overwhelming. It wasn't just a device, it was a gateway to a vast, unknown world of information, skills, and knowledge. The interface allowed Eli to learn anything instantly. In seconds, he could understand complex engineering concepts, speak multiple languages, or even master advanced combat techniques. It was like a flood of understanding, pouring into his mind at an uncontrollable pace. He learned quickly, but it wasn't without its struggles. He had to temper his desire to dive into everything at once, focusing on the immediate need for action. One thing Eli quickly realized was that his great-uncle Nathaniel hadn't left him the device just to satisfy his curiosity. The more he learned, the more he understood that there was a purpose to all of this. Nathaniel had been part of an underground resistance, working to dismantle the corporate oligarchies that ruled humanity with an iron fist. These corporations controlled everything from the food people ate to the very education system that Eli had worked in. They were the true powers behind the governments, manipulating them from the shadows, ensuring that the masses stayed ignorant and dependent. The information Eli accessed on the quantum device painted a bleak picture of the world. Human potential was being suppressed, not only through the control of wealth, but also by keeping knowledge locked away. The wealthiest corporations had technologies that could end hunger, solve energy crises, and even cure diseases. But instead of using these advancements for the greater good, they hoarded them, maintaining their power by keeping everyone else in the dark. Eli's thoughts kept drifting back to Jake, the student he had tried to help with a pair of shoes. He had seen the suffering in Jake's eyes, the way he felt trapped by a system that refused to offer him a way out. It wasn't just Jake, it was everyone. Eli had always thought that teaching was enough, that if he just reached one student at a time, he could make a difference. But now, he realized that the fight was bigger than that. It wasn't just about helping individuals. It was about breaking the system that held everyone captive. The more Eli used the device, the clearer his path became. He couldn't stay on the sidelines any longer. He had to take action, real, direct action. But he also knew that the risks were enormous. The corporate elite had eyes everywhere, and anyone who tried to disrupt the status quo would be silenced, one way or another. Even though the information Eli now possessed could bring down the entire corporate network, he wasn't foolish enough to believe he could do it alone. He needed help, and that's when he remembered Nathaniel's journal. The small journal that had come with the quantum device was more than just a collection of notes, it was a guide. Nathaniel had listed names, locations, and connections to other people who were part of the resistance, people who could help. Some were former scientists, others ex-military, and some were just ordinary citizens who had seen the truth and decided to fight back. Nathaniel had planned to create a network, a united front of people who would tear down the corporations from within, and now, it was Eli's turn to pick up that mantle. With a deep breath, Eli set to work. He used the device to contact the individuals Nathaniel had written about. Some responded quickly, others took time, but little by little, Eli began to assemble a team. He reached out to people in far-off colonies, in the shadowy backstreets of the city, even in the corporate towers themselves. Some of them were hesitant at first, unsure whether they could trust a stranger with so much knowledge. But Eli knew what they all needed, a common enemy, a reason to stand together. And as he explained the reality of the world, the truth of the corporate grip on humanity, the pieces slowly began to fall into place. One person who responded to Eli's call was Dr. Serena Hall. She was a former research scientist who had worked for one of the largest biotech firms in the city before being pushed out for questioning the ethics of the company's practices. Dr. Hall was a brilliant mind, specializing in genetic engineering, and she had been a vocal critic of the way the corporations were experimenting on the lower classes, using them as test subjects without their consent. Eli knew that with her expertise, they could begin to develop countermeasures, ways to disrupt the technology the corporations use to control people. Another ally was Ray, an ex-soldier who had once worked as a private security contractor for one of the wealthiest families in the city. Ray had seen firsthand the violence the corporations used to protect their interests, and he had witnessed the human cost of their power. He had left the life of mercenary work behind. But he knew that the resistance needed people like him, people who could fight when the time came. Eli also connected with someone from an unexpected place, Mia, a high-ranking corporate executive who had grown disillusioned with the system. Mia was a data analyst who worked in the corporate sector, specializing in monitoring and tracking employees, customers, and even entire communities. She had access to sensitive data that could expose corruption, but for years, she had been forced to turn a blind eye. After hearing Eli's message, she knew she had no choice but to act. She had information that could bring down entire sectors of the corporate empire. As the team began to come together, Eli's initial doubts began to fade. The resistance was growing. They began working in secret, using encrypted communications and underground safe houses to meet. Each person brought their own skills and knowledge to the table. Together, they began formulating a plan to take down the corporations, starting with one of the largest, Obsidian Enterprises. Obsidian was a behemoth, an energy corporation that controlled the power grid for the entire city and many of the surrounding regions. If Eli and his team could expose the dark secrets behind Obsidian's operations, it could shake the foundations of the entire corporate network. They had to start somewhere, and Obsidian seemed like the perfect target. The first phase of the plan was to gather evidence, real, undeniable proof of Obsidian's manipulation of global resources and their illegal use of technology. Mia, using her position within the company, was able to provide them with crucial files, data that showed how Obsidian had been siphoning energy from poor communities, driving them into even deeper poverty while lining their own pockets. It was a damning revelation, and Eli knew it was just the beginning. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. The more they exposed, the more attention they attracted. Eli began to realize just how deep the conspiracy ran, how many people were involved, and how far-reaching the consequences of their actions would be. One night, as the team met to go over the latest intel, there was a sudden knock at the door. It wasn't a knock from someone who was supposed to be there. Ray, ever vigilant, went to the door and peeked through the small window in the doorframe. He cursed under his breath. "It's them," he said, his voice grim. Obsidian's hired guns. Eli's heart raced. The moment had come. They had crossed the line. And now, the fight was real. In an instant, everything Eli had worked for, the quiet resistance, the planning, the strategy, was about to be tested. He had no choice but to act. The fight for humanity's freedom had begun, and there was no turning back. The knock on the door was the beginning of everything Eli had feared. He knew the consequences of challenging the corporate giants, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of it. The hired guns were already outside, their presence a chilling reminder that this fight would not be easy. Eli's heart pounded in his chest as Ray quickly moved into position by the door, signaling for everyone to stay quiet. "Mia, Serena, get back," Eli whispered urgently. "We can't let them see you." The rest of the team moved quickly, hiding behind furniture or blending into the shadows. Mia, her expression tense but determined, grabbed the encrypted data drives from the table, clutching them to her chest as if they were the most precious things in the world. Dr. Hall, her calm demeanor never wavering, adjusted her glasses and prepared the devices they would need to hack into Obsidian's mainframe later. The plan they had so carefully crafted was now on the brink of collapse, but there was no going back. Eli took a deep breath, his mind racing. They had come so far. The evidence they had gathered could destroy Obsidian Enterprises, could expose the corruption of the entire corporate structure. But if they didn't act fast, it would all be for nothing. He couldn't afford to let fear control him now. He had to stay focused. He had to protect his team. Ray motioned for Eli to follow him to the back exit. The sounds of footsteps in the hallway grew louder, and Eli could hear muffled voices. They were close. "Ready?" Ray asked in a low voice, his hand on the door handle. Eli nodded. "Let's go." They moved swiftly through the narrow hallway, the back exit just ahead. As they reached the door, Eli's thoughts raced. The quantum device, the one that had given him so much power and knowledge, was safely hidden in his pocket. But it was no good if they didn't make it out alive. He didn't want to think about what would happen if they got caught. Not now. He had to stay calm. The resistance, his team, everything depended on them getting to safety. Just as Ray opened the back door, there was a loud crash. The front door had been kicked in. They had arrived. The sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallway, and Eli knew they didn't have much time. He motioned for everyone to move quickly. Pushing the door open wider, they slipped out into the dark alley behind the building, hoping the cover of night would help them remain unnoticed. They moved fast, keeping close to the walls, their footsteps barely audible on the damp ground. Eli kept his eyes on Ray, who led the way. The alley was narrow, with tall buildings on either side, and the faint sounds of the city beyond. It was a world away from the glitzy corporate towers they were fighting against, a world of shadows, of hidden lives, and of the people who had been left behind. Mia, who had been quiet up until now, turned to Eli as they moved. "I can't believe they found us this fast," she whispered, her face drawn tight with concern. "We must have triggered something, either a tracker or a signal." Eli nodded, his mind spinning. "Doesn't matter now. We need to get to the safe house. If we can make it there, we'll be able to plan our next move." The safe house was a place they had set up in the old part of the city, hidden away from the prying eyes of the corporations. It wasn't much, just a small, unassuming apartment, but it was enough to keep them safe for the time being. Once there, they could regroup and figure out how to finish what they had started. They had nearly reached the end of the alley when a sudden voice froze them in place. "Stop right there!" a man shouted. Eli's heart skipped a beat. He turned, his eyes scanning the darkness, searching for the source of the voice. The alley behind them was empty, but the sound of footsteps was growing louder. They were closing in. Ray immediately motioned for everyone to take cover. The group scattered, finding hiding spots behind dumpsters and crates, trying to blend into the shadows as best they could. Eli's breath was shallow as he crouched behind a stack of old crates, his eyes darting to the alley's entrance. He could hear voices now, low and menacing. "Where are they?" one voice demanded. "They can't have gotten far." Eli's pulse quickened. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment bearing down on him. The hired mercenaries had found them. They had to move. And they had to move fast. Ray, ever the tactician, signaled for Eli to follow him. The two of them moved quickly through the shadows, ducking down side streets, avoiding the main roads where the mercenaries were likely searching. They weren't just trying to escape, they were trying to survive. After several minutes, they reached a narrow entrance that led underground. Ray pushed open the heavy door, motioning for the others to follow. The safe house was just a few steps down the stairwell. They hurried inside, breathing heavily. But they were safe, at least for now. Inside, the dim light of a single bulb illuminated the small space. Eli could hear the sound of his team catching their breath, their faces tense with the knowledge of how close they had come to being caught. As they gathered around the table, Mia pulled out the data drives, her fingers trembling as she handed them to Eli. "We have to act fast," she said. "Obsidian's getting smarter. They'll trace us if we stay here too long." Eli took the drives, his mind still racing. He hadn't felt this kind of pressure in years. The stakes had never been higher. Their small team was all that stood between the truth and the system that kept humanity enslaved. Ray's voice broke through his thoughts. "We can't wait for a better opportunity, Eli. We have to go now." Eli nodded, taking the quantum device from his pocket. "We have everything we need. The evidence. The tech. Now we just need to hit them where it hurts." Dr. Hall adjusted her glasses and looked at Eli. "The mainframe. If we can hack into Obsidian's mainframe, we can release everything to the public. We can expose them for what they are." Eli glanced at each of them, his resolve hardening. "Let's do it." They worked quickly, setting up the equipment in the corner of the room. Mia handled the data transfer, Serena prepared the hacking tools, and Ray kept watch, making sure no one followed them into the safe house. Eli, holding the quantum device, connected it to the system, activating the program that would allow them to break through Obsidian's security. It took minutes, but it felt like hours. The tension in the room was palpable as the computer screen flickered to life. They were in. They had access. Eli didn't waste a second. He initiated the transfer, pushing the evidence and files they had gathered into the public domain. In an instant, millions of people around the world would be able to see what Obsidian and the other corporations had been hiding. The truth would be out. Just as they were about to finish, an alarm went off. "They're onto us!" Ray shouted. Eli's heart raced as the team scrambled to shut down the system and cover their tracks. But the damage had already been done. The truth was out. The alarms blared louder, and Eli could hear the sound of footsteps coming down the stairwell. The fight was far from over. But for the first time in his life, Eli felt a sense of hope. The battle had begun, and humanity was waking up. As they raced to escape, Eli looked back one last time at the computer screen. The evidence was there. The world would know. And nothing, not even the might of the corporations, could stop the truth now.